We are living through the greatest information paradox in human history. Never before have we had such instantaneous access to the collective knowledge of the entire world. Every geopolitical shift, every scientific breakthrough, every opposing political ideology. Yet despite standing in this endless ocean of facts, most of us are completely parched, drinking only from a tiny, carefully curated puddle. You might think you are surfing the web, but the truth is, the web is surfing you. Every click, every paused scroll, every micro-reaction is being harvested to build an invisible cage around your mind. This is the filter selection effect. It is not just a glitch in your social media feed. It is a multi-billion-dollar architecture designed to manipulate your reality. But to truly understand how these digital echo chambers capture us so easily, we cannot just look at the code. We have to look inward. We have to examine the profound psychological vulnerabilities that make us complicit in our own manipulation. Today, applying the revolutionary framework of Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman, we are going to dissect the anatomy of the filter bubble. We will explore how our brains are literally hardwired to crave these digital cages, and more importantly, how we can break free. Prepare to see your digital life through a radically different lens. To dismantle the trap of the filter selection effect, we first need to understand the fundamental operating system of the human brain. Daniel Kahneman, in his magnum opus Thinking Fast and Slow, revolutionized psychology by categorizing our mental processes into two distinct, often conflicting agents, System 1 and System 2. If you want to understand why algorithms control society, you must understand the eternal war between these two systems. System 1 is the brain's autopilot. It is fast, intuitive, emotional, and operates completely beneath our conscious awareness. When you instantly recognize a friend's face in a crowded room, when you flinch at a sudden loud noise, or when you read a simple billboard on the highway, that is System 1 in action. It is a rapid-fire pattern recognition machine that requires almost zero effort to function. System 2, however, is the heavy machinery. It is slow, deliberate, analytical, and highly logical. System 2 wakes up when you are trying to calculate complex taxes, when you are parking a car in a tight space, or when you are actively trying to deconstruct a highly nuanced geopolitical debate regarding foreign policy. To appreciate the scale of this biological vulnerability, consider human evolution. For hundreds of thousands of years, survival depended on rapid instinctual judgments. If our ancestors paused to logically analyze the rustling in the bushes using System 2, they would have been eaten by a predator. System 1 was built for survival in a physically dangerous but intellectually simple environment. However, we have transplanted this ancient, rapid response hardware into the 21st century, an era defined by infinite data, subtle manipulation, and ideological warfare. We are using a prehistoric survival mechanism to navigate the most complex information ecosystem ever created. Here is the critical underlying vulnerability that technology companies have weaponized against us. System 2 is inherently biologically lazy. Kahneman refers to this as the law of least effort. Thinking deeply requires a massive expenditure of metabolic energy. It burns glucose. It is physically taxing. Therefore, the human brain has evolved to avoid activating System 2 unless it is absolutely necessary. Our default state, our most desired state, is to let System 1 run the show. We desperately crave a psychological state that Kahneman calls cognitive ease. Cognitive ease is the sweet spot of mental processing. When you are experiencing cognitive ease, you are in a familiar environment. The information you are receiving is easy to understand, and most importantly, it aligns perfectly with your existing beliefs. In this state, your guard is down. You feel safe, you feel smart, and you feel right. System 1 is driving the car, and System 2 is fast asleep in the passenger seat. Now contrast this with cognitive strain. Imagine scrolling through your feed and suddenly encountering a profoundly well-researched, meticulously argued essay that completely destroys a political stance you have held for a decade. What happens? You feel an immediate, almost physical sense of friction. Your heart rate might elevate slightly. You feel frustrated. To actually process this opposing viewpoint to evaluate its merits without bias, you have to forcefully wake up your System 2. You have to expend energy to overcome the cognitive strain. This is the exact moment where the filter selection effect asserts its dominance. Algorithms on platforms like YouTube, X, or TikTok are not optimized for truth. They are optimized for watch time and engagement. And the most efficient way to maximize engagement is to eliminate cognitive strain. The machine learns with terrifying speed what specific types of content trigger your system into a state of uncomfortable friction. Once it maps your triggers, the algorithm begins its work as an invisible editor of your reality. It systematically filters out the complex, the contradictory, and the nuanced. If a piece of content challenges your worldview or questions your favorite political figure, the algorithm buries it. It constructs a frictionless digital tunnel lined exclusively with content that triggers cognitive ease. You are no longer consuming a balanced diet of information. You are being force-fed a highly processed, intellectually sugary syrup that requires zero mental chewing. When you multiply this individual biological vulnerability by billions of users, you get the modern internet. The filter selection effect is not a malfunction. It is the natural endpoint of applying machine learning to human psychology. Technology platforms have mapped the neurochemistry of cognitive ease. They know exactly how many confirming posts it takes to trigger a dopamine release, and they know exactly how quickly a dissenting opinion will cause you to close the application. Kahneman notes that when information is easy to process, we naturally associate it with truth. The algorithm exploits this heuristic ruthlessly. By drowning you in a high volume of agreeable, frictionless content, it creates an artificial consensus. System 1 looks around this customized digital environment and says, "Look at all these people who agree with us. Look at all these articles confirming our bias. This must be the absolute undeniable truth." This creates a dangerous paradox of choice. We firmly believe we are independently choosing the content we consume, but in reality, our choices have already been pre-selected by an algorithm that prioritizes our comfort over our enlightenment. We are handed a menu where every option is our favorite meal, and we are completely unaware of the vast, diverse buffet that has been hidden in the kitchen. By outsourcing our intellectual curiosity to a machine that optimizes for frictionless consumption, we are slowly eroding our capacity for critical thought. We become intellectually fragile, unable to handle the slightest breeze of contradiction. We often blame algorithms for polarizing society, but the dark reality is that the algorithm is merely giving our System 1 exactly what it biologically desires: an effortless existence, free from the pain of changing our minds. We step into the filter bubble willingly because the alternative constant cognitive strain in an infinitely complex world is too exhausting. But as we surrender our reality to the comfort of the algorithm, we fall victim to a catastrophic blind spot. The architecture of cognitive ease is the foundation upon which all digital manipulation is built, and recognizing this biological laziness is the mandatory first step toward reclaiming our intellectual autonomy. The human mind is a master storyteller, but it is a profoundly flawed journalist. To comprehend the full destructive power of the filter selection effect, we must explore one of Daniel Kahneman's most critical concepts, an acronym he famously coined as WYSIATI, which stands for "What you see is all there is." This simple, 5-letter principle unlocks the terrifying reality of how we process information in the digital age and explains exactly why the invisible cages we build for ourselves are so incredibly effective. According to Kahneman's research, our intuitive System 1 is a machine fundamentally designed for jumping to conclusions. It does not wait for all the facts to be meticulously gathered. It does not pause to ask, "What critical piece of information might I be missing before I form a permanent opinion on this complex issue?" Instead, System 1 takes the fragmented, incomplete information immediately available to it and desperately weaves it into the best, most coherent story possible. If the resulting story makes logical sense on the surface, System 1 accepts it as absolute, unquestionable truth. It treats the visible information as if it is the only information that exists in the entire universe. It literally cannot account for the invisible. Now imagine applying the WYSIATI principle to your daily digital existence. The internet in its totality contains the entirety of human knowledge. It encompasses every conflicting viewpoint, every subtle nuance, and every undeniable fact regarding politics, economics, science, and culture. Yet when you open a social media application, a video sharing platform, or a news aggregator, you are not seeing the internet. You are seeing a microscopic, highly curated, algorithmically manipulated fraction of it. You are seeing a feed perfectly tailored by a machine learning model that has intensely studied your previous clicks, your watch time, your search history, and your deepest emotional triggers. The algorithm meticulously filters out the vast majority of reality and presents you with a strikingly narrow slice of the world. But because of the biological flaw of Wysiati, your brain does not perceive this as a narrow slice. Your brain looks at your personalized, heavily filtered feed and instinctively concludes, this is the world. This is what everyone is talking about. This is what everyone believes. You are completely blind to the millions of articles, videos, and alternative perspectives that the algorithm explicitly decided not to show you. And because you cannot see them, your System 1 automatically assumes they simply do not exist. This creates a highly dangerous illusion of complete knowledge. Kahneman points out a deeply unsettling truth. The confidence people have in their beliefs is not a reliable measure of the quality of evidence they possess. Confidence is simply a feeling, and this feeling is generated by the cognitive ease and the coherence of the story that System 1 has constructed. Filter bubbles are essentially the ultimate coherence machines. By systematically removing dissenting voices, contradictory evidence, and inconvenient facts, the algorithm ensures that the story you see is never challenged. It is perfectly artificially consistent. When you are surrounded by a perfectly consistent narrative day after day, your confidence in your worldview naturally skyrockets. You feel incredibly informed. You feel undeniably right. But this confidence is an absolute fabrication. It is a byproduct of being deliberately shielded from complexity. You are making critical life decisions, casting political votes, and judging the morality of others based on a carefully orchestrated illusion of all there is. You are mistaking a customized algorithmic playlist of facts for the entire symphony of objective reality. Consider the profound societal polarization we witness across the globe today. When you encounter someone with a radically different political, social, or economic viewpoint, your immediate reaction might be shock, anger, or utter disbelief. You might look at them and think, how could they possibly believe that? Are they stupid? Are they malicious? But Kahneman's Wysiati offers a chilling alternative explanation. They are not necessarily stupid, nor are they malicious. They are simply living in a completely different algorithmic universe. Their System 1 has constructed a perfectly coherent story based on a completely different set of filtered information. What they see is all there is for them, just as what you see is all there is for you. You are two people standing in two different customized digital realities, shouting at each other across an invisible, unbridgeable void, completely unaware that neither of you is seeing the whole picture. The algorithm has not just filtered your content, it has filtered your capacity for empathy. It has made it neurologically impossible to understand the cognitive landscape of anyone who exists outside your personal bubble. Furthermore, the Wysiati mechanism makes us exceptionally vulnerable to deliberate manipulation. When bad actors, political propagandists, or even aggressive digital marketers understand that you will base your entire judgment only on what is immediately presented to you, they realize they do not need to construct a bulletproof, comprehensive argument. They only need to control the very first pieces of information that cross your screen. If they can successfully feed your System 1 a few emotionally charged, perfectly aligned data points, your brain will do the rest of the heavy lifting. Your brain will automatically connect the artificial dots, ignore the glaring omissions, and adopt the manipulated narrative as your own deeply held conviction. Why does System 1 so readily discard the concept of missing information? It goes back to the evolutionary imperative of speed. In our ancestral environment, pausing to calculate unknown variables when a predator approached was a lethal luxury. Immediate decisive action based on the nearest available clues was heavily favored by natural selection. Our brains evolved to be fast, not mathematically precise or perfectly objective. We are optimized for immediate survival, not for navigating an infinitely complex, algorithmically driven information ecology. When we scroll through a news feed today, our brain is utilizing the exact same biological hardware that our ancestors used to scan the savannah for threats. System 1 rapidly processes the sensational headlines, the contextless memes, and the short, highly edited video clips. It strings them together into a seamless narrative of current events. Because the algorithm has pre-selected these items to align with our pre-existing biases, the resulting narrative is incredibly smooth. There is zero cognitive friction. There is absolutely no reason for the lazy System 2 to wake up and sound an alarm. System 2. The logical skeptic remains comfortably dormant because System 1 proudly declares, "I have surveyed the environment. The story makes perfect sense. There is no threat here." The ultimate tragedy of Wysiati in the modern era is that the environment System 1 is surveying is entirely synthetic. The algorithm acts as an invisible, omnipotent editor of your reality. It is an editor with a very specific profit-driven agenda, maximizing your engagement time. It knows that showing you the missing information, the complex nuances, the valid counter-arguments, the uncomfortable historical facts will cause immediate cognitive strain. Cognitive strain inevitably leads to user disengagement. Therefore, the algorithm's prime directive is to permanently obscure the "what you don't see" in order to keep you blissfully perpetually submerged in the "what you see." We have become active participants in our own cognitive isolation, armed with a biological blind spot that modern technology has learned to exploit with devastating efficiency. If Wysiati, what you see is all there is the illusion of complete knowledge, then confirmation bias is the psychological mechanism that violently defends that illusion against any intrusion of objective reality. In the context of Daniel Kahneman's dual system theory, confirmation bias is frequently misunderstood by the general public. We tend to think of it as a character flaw, a conscious stubbornness, or a deliberate refusal to admit we are wrong in a debate. But Kahneman's groundbreaking research reveals something much more insidious. Confirmation bias is an automatic involuntary operation of System 1. It is not a conscious choice. It is a biological default setting that dictates how we perceive every piece of data we encounter. When you encounter a new piece of information, System 1 does not act like an impartial judge carefully weighing evidence on a perfectly balanced scale. Instead, it acts like a ruthless, highly motivated defense attorney desperately trying to prove a predetermined conclusion. Kahneman explains this through a cognitive mechanism he calls the positive test strategy. When you are subconsciously asking a question like, "Is this new economic policy effective?" System 1 does not scan your memory or your digital environment for all objective data regarding the policy. It immediately and exclusively searches for evidence that confirms the premise you already lean towards. It asks, "What are the good things I know about this?" Or conversely, "What are the terrible things I know about this?" It deliberately looks for hits and completely systematically ignores misses. System 1 is fundamentally programmed to believe. To understand any statement whatsoever Kahneman argues, System 1 must first temporarily believe it to be true. It has to construct a rapid mental simulation where the statement is a fact in order to grasp its meaning at all. Unbelieving the act of rejecting a statement as false or critically analyzing its logical validity is an active energy-consuming operation that requires the heavy lifting of System 2. But as we have established, System 2 is profoundly lazy. Therefore, when faced with information that perfectly aligns with our pre-existing worldview system, one instantly accepts it without verification. The information feels fluent, familiar, and undeniably true. System 2 never even wakes up to audit the claim. This is exactly where the filter selection effect transforms from a passive digital mirror into an active psychological weapon. Social media platforms, search engines, and recommendation algorithms are the ultimate frictionless enablers of the positive test strategy. They do not merely show you what you want to see. They actively eradicate the cognitive friction that would force your System 2 to engage in the difficult act of unbelieving. When you exist inside a filter bubble, you are essentially outsourcing your innate confirmation bias to a supercomputer capable of processing billions of data points a second, working tirelessly to ensure you never have to experience the discomfort of doubt. Think about the anatomy of a typical digital echo chamber. You click on a highly polarized article that validates your outrage about a specific social issue. The algorithm instantly registers this engagement as a success metric. The next time you open the application, it feeds you 5 more articles, videos, and posts with the exact same emotional and ideological resonance, because these pieces of content confirm what you already believe. Your System 1 processes them with absolute zero cognitive strain. You feel a massive rush of validation. You feel incredibly informed. You feel completely vindicated in your anger or your praise. But behind the glowing screen, a terrifying psychological feedback loop is tightening its grip. Every time your confirmation bias is artificially rewarded by the algorithm, the neural pathways associated with that specific belief become physically stronger. This involves Kahneman's concept of associative memory. Ideas in your mind are not isolated islands. They are connected in a vast, intricate, and highly sensitive web. When one idea is activated, for example, a negative stereotype about a rival political group, it automatically activates a cascade of related ideas, negative emotions, specific historical memories, and even physical fight or flight responses. The algorithm acts as a hyperstimulant for your associative memory. By relentlessly bombarding you with confirming evidence, it repeatedly fires those specific neural pathways, reinforcing the connections until they become rigid and unyielding. Through this algorithmic repetition, the belief subtly shifts from being a simple changeable opinion to a fundamental component of your core identity. Once a belief is tied to your sense of self, challenging it is no longer processed as an intellectual debate about objective facts. It is processed by the human brain as a literal physical threat to your survival. This is why internet debates so rarely change minds and so frequently devolve into hostility. Kahneman also introduces the halo effect, which further supercharges confirmation bias within a digital filter bubble. The halo effect is the cognitive tendency to like or dislike everything about a person, a brand, or a source based on a single overarching impression. In the digital world, this manifests intensely through the influencers, thought leaders, and partisan media outlets that dominate our personalized feeds. Once the algorithm identifies that you align with a specific commentator's worldview, it dramatically elevates their visibility to you. Because they validate your beliefs, your System 1 assigns a glowing positive halo to them. Suddenly, confirmation bias extends beyond just accepting isolated facts. It becomes about blindly trusting personalities. Even if this trusted source shares information completely outside their area of expertise or spreads blatant, easily debunked misinformation, your System 1 automatically lowers its defenses. The cognitive ease associated with the familiar friendly face completely overrides the necessity for critical analysis. You do not evaluate the claim on its own objective merits. You evaluate it based on the halo of the person delivering it. The algorithm knows this perfectly well. It knows that building parasocial relationships with confirming voices is the stickiest, most profitable form of digital engagement ever invented. This leads us to what Kahneman terms associative coherence. System 1 is obsessed with creating a coherent story of the world, a narrative where absolutely everything makes sense. Everything has a clear cause, and everything fits neatly together. In a natural environment, this is incredibly difficult because the real world is inherently messy, contradictory, random, and deeply complex. But inside a filter bubble, associative coherence is artificially perfect. The algorithm meticulously curates a reality where every news event, every economic shift, and every cultural phenomenon magically aligns with your core narrative. If your bubble has convinced you that society is collapsing, every minor fluctuation in the stock market, every isolated local crime, and every pessimistic opinion piece is served to you as undeniable compounding proof, the algorithm ruthlessly filters out the stabilizing indicators, the technological breakthroughs, or the quiet acts of human progress. Your System 1 connects these cherry-picked, algorithmically delivered dots, creating a terrifyingly coherent, emotionally resonant narrative. The confirmation bias is so absolute, so seamlessly integrated into your daily digital consumption that the very concept of an alternative perspective seems not just factually wrong, but completely absurd or clinically insane. We are navigating a digital landscape meticulously engineered to keep our System 1 on an endless cycle of validation, silently starving us of the cognitive friction necessary for true intellectual growth. Up to this point, we have examined the biological blueprint of our own minds. We have explored how System 1's desperate evolutionary need for cognitive ease, its inescapable susceptibility to the Wysiati illusion, and its involuntary, deeply ingrained confirmation bias create the perfect conditions for profound self-deception. However, the filter selection effect is not merely an unfortunate accident of human psychology. It is the direct result of a highly sophisticated, multi-billion-dollar technological infrastructure actively, intentionally exploiting those exact biological blind spots. We must now shift our focus from the prisoner to the prison itself. We must examine the mechanics of the machine and answer the critical question: how exactly do algorithms hijack our minds? To understand this hijacking, we must look at another of Daniel Kahneman's most famous discoveries, the availability heuristic. The availability heuristic is a mental shortcut where people judge the frequency, importance, or probability of an event based entirely on how easily and quickly examples come to mind. In a natural historical environment, this heuristic made sense. If you could easily remember several instances of a river flooding, it was probably a dangerous river. But in the modern digital ecosystem, an algorithm completely artificializes the concept of availability. It artificially manipulates what is easy for your brain to recall. Imagine an algorithm determines that you linger for a few extra seconds on videos reporting political corruption. The machine's singular goal is to maximize your time on the platform. Therefore, it begins to flood your customized feed with endless reports, opinion pieces, and speculative videos about political corruption. Within a week, your System 1 is absolutely saturated with these specific images and narratives because they are the only things crossing your screen. They are incredibly easy for your brain to recall. Consequently, your System 1 uses the availability heuristic to conclude that the entire system is entirely corrupt, falling apart, and untrustworthy, even if objective macro-level data shows unprecedented levels of institutional stability. You suffer from what Kahneman calls base rate neglect. The algorithm has manipulated your psychological sample size of reality, convincing you that a highly filtered anomaly is the everyday norm. Algorithms also brutally exploit Kahneman's concept of the affect heuristic. When faced with a complex, intellectually demanding question, System 1 will often subconsciously substitute it with a much easier, emotionally driven question. Instead of engaging System 2 to ask, what are the long-term nuanced economic implications of this new foreign policy? System 1 bypasses the hard work and asks, how angry does the politician proposing this policy make me feel? The answer to the second question is immediate, effortless, and highly emotional. Social media platforms and recommendation engines are implicitly built to capitalize on this affect heuristic. They understand through trillions of data points that nuanced, balanced, highly factual information does not trigger a strong emotional response. Without a strong emotional response, there is no immediate user engagement. The most powerful, reliable, and profitable emotion for keeping a human being glued to a screen is not joy, nor is it intellectual curiosity. It is outrage. Outrage is a highly arousing emotion. It demands immediate attention and provokes an urgent desire to react, comment, or share. Thus, the algorithm naturally evolves into an outrage generation engine. It intentionally serves you the most extreme inflammatory and uncharitable representations of opposing viewpoints to ensure you remain in a constant, highly profitable state of emotional agitation. You are no longer thinking, you are merely reacting. Furthermore, these digital systems exploit Kahneman's Nobel Prize-winning concept of loss aversion. Kahneman definitively proved that human beings do not process gains and losses symmetrically. The psychological pain of losing something is roughly twice as intense as the psychological joy of gaining something of equal value. We are biologically hardwired to be overly sensitive to threats because, evolutionarily speaking, missing a reward was a pity, but missing a threat was fatal. Digital platforms leverage this biological asymmetry to create addictive, never-ending fear loops. Content that suggests you are about to lose something, your personal freedom, your societal status, your financial security, or your cultural identity, commands vastly more attention than content discussing potential societal improvements or mutual gains. The filter bubble traps you in a perpetual state of perceived threat. The algorithm identifies your deepest demographic and political insecurities and relentlessly feeds them, convincing you that the world outside your bubble is highly hostile, morally bankrupt, and directly coming for you. This orchestrated fear effectively paralyzes System 2. When human beings are afraid, our brains revert to primitive defensive tribal thinking. We cling fiercely to our ideological in-groups and instinctively demonize the out-groups, violently deepening the societal divide. The hijacking is ultimately complete when we mistake our algorithmic feed for our own conscious, independent thought. Because the information flows so smoothly, and because it aligns perfectly with the cognitive ease our System 1 craves, we genuinely believe we are making independent choices about what to read and what to believe. We proudly think we are doing our own research, but the reality is that the menu has been entirely pre-written to manipulate our specific heuristics. The invisible cage of the filter bubble is not just a passive barrier keeping diverse information out. It is a meticulously designed behavioral modification tool. In this digital economy, you are not the customer, and you are not merely the user. Your attention, and more specifically, your System 1's cognitive vulnerabilities, are the raw materials being mined, processed, and sold to the highest bidder, whether that bidder is an advertiser selling a product or a political entity selling an ideology. Our cognitive biases are simply the mechanical levers the machine pulls to maximize its metrics, leaving us politically polarized, emotionally exhausted, and fundamentally detached from objective reality. Understanding this exploitation is terrifying, but as we will see in the final segment, it is the only way to begin the arduous process of waking up System 2 and breaking the glass of our digital cages. We have diagnosed the disease. We have mapped the architecture of the invisible cage, recognized the biological laziness of System 1, exposed the fatal illusion of Wysieti, and witnessed how confirmation bias is weaponized by multi-billion-dollar algorithms. At this point, the situation might feel entirely hopeless. If our very biology is working against us, and if the most powerful supercomputers in human history are actively exploiting that biology, how can we possibly retain our intellectual freedom? The answer lies in the very same framework Daniel Kahneman provided us. We cannot change our evolutionary hardware. We cannot permanently turn off System 1, nor would we want to, as it is essential for daily survival. What we can do, however, is consciously design mental tripwires. We can deliberately re-engineer our digital environment to intentionally awaken System 2. Breaking the filter bubble is not a matter of willpower. It is a matter of strategic applied friction. The first and most critical strategy is to actively cultivate cognitive strain. As we establish, the algorithm's primary objective is to keep you in a state of cognitive ease, feeding you frictionless, agreeable information. To break the bubble, you must rebel against this comfort. You must treat cognitive strain not as an annoyance to be avoided, but as a vital sign of intellectual health. This means intentionally diversifying your digital diet with voices, publications, and perspectives that genuinely agitate you. You must routinely expose your System 1 to well-argued, highly credible information that directly contradicts your core beliefs. When you feel that familiar spike of frustration, that immediate urge to close the tab or dismiss the author as a fool, you must recognize that feeling for what it is, the alarm bells signaling that System 2 is required. Instead of fleeing back to the comfort of your echo chamber, force yourself to stay. Read the opposing argument slowly. Analyze the underlying premises. By simply enduring the friction, you break the algorithm's spell and reclaim your capacity for critical analysis. The second strategy involves explicitly dismantling the illusion of Wysieti, what you see is all there is. Because System 1 automatically assumes the information immediately in front of it is the complete picture, you must train your System 2 to constantly ask the missing questions. Whenever a sensational headline, a viral video, or a deeply emotional political claim crosses your screen, you must instinctively pause and ask, what is the invisible data here? What historical context has been omitted to make this story more dramatic? Who benefits from me believing this specific narrative? Kahneman suggests a technique often used in corporate decision-making called the pre-mortem. Applied to digital consumption, it works like this before you accept a piece of information as absolute truth. Imagine that a year from now, this information is proven to be completely false. Now work backward. What are the most likely reasons it was wrong? Was the sample size too small? Was the source financially compromised? This mental exercise forcefully overrides System 1's tendency to jump to conclusions and forces System 2 to actively hunt for the invisible reality outside the frame. To neutralize the devastating effects of confirmation bias, we must implement a third strategy separating our fundamental identity from our digital information. The filter bubble thrives because algorithms successfully link our political and social beliefs to our core sense of self, turning every intellectual disagreement into a physical threat. You must consciously decouple who you are from what you consume. An opinion about a tax policy, a foreign war, or a cultural shift is simply a hypothesis based on available data. It is not a religious doctrine. When you view your opinions as temporary hypotheses rather than permanent identities, admitting you are wrong stops being a psychological failure and becomes a scientific victory. You must actively reward yourself for changing your mind. When you encounter data that disproves a long-held belief, acknowledge the cognitive dissonance. Thank your system 2 for waking up and adjust your worldview. Intellectual humility is the ultimate kryptonite to the filter selection effect. The algorithm cannot manipulate a mind that is genuinely willing to be wrong. Furthermore, we must counteract the fast-paced, high-arousal environment of the digital world by embracing what we might call slow information. The internet is optimized for System 1 short bursts, rapid cuts, sensational thumbnails, and character limits. This format guarantees that System 2 remains dormant. To engage your analytical mind, you must change the format of your consumption. Step outside the algorithmic feed entirely. Read long-form investigative journalism. Dive into comprehensive history books and consume raw, unedited primary sources rather than algorithmically condensed summaries. Slow information forces a biological downshift. It lowers your emotional arousal, reduces your reliance on the affect heuristic, and provides System 2 with the necessary time and space to process complex variables. You cannot solve a deep systemic issue by scrolling through a 60-second vertical video. You must engage with the material at a pace that matches its complexity. Finally, you must take active ownership of the algorithmic machine itself. You are not a helpless victim of the code. You are the one training it. Every action you take online is a vote for the type of reality you want the machine to build for you. If you consistently reward outrage, sensationalism, and confirmation bias with your clicks and your watch time, the machine will build you a cage of anger and ignorance. But you can train the algorithm to work for your intellectual growth. Deliberately search for diverse topics. Follow thought leaders across the entire political spectrum. Click on nuanced, balanced, and deeply researched content, even if it is less immediately entertaining. By changing your behavioral inputs, you force the machine to reconstruct your digital environment. You transform the algorithm from a warden that keeps you trapped in a bubble of cognitive ease into a powerful tool that continuously challenges, expands, and refines your understanding of the world. Waking up System 2 is exhausting, and maintaining it requires relentless effort. But the alternative is to spend the rest of your life staring at the shadows on the wall of a digital cave, firmly believing that the invisible cage around you is the entire universe. We began this journey by looking at the invisible cages we build for ourselves, the algorithmic echo chambers that comfortably trap our minds. We have traversed the cognitive architecture mapped out by Daniel Kahneman, understanding how our System 1 desperately craves the ease of the familiar, how it falls prey to the illusion of what you see is all there is, and how it forcefully defends its worldview through automatic confirmation bias. We have seen how multi-billion-dollar algorithms weaponize these exact biological vulnerabilities, turning our natural mental shortcuts into engines of polarization, outrage, and profound societal division. But the most crucial takeaway from Kahneman's work is not despair. It is the immense power of awareness. The filter selection effect only holds absolute power over you when it operates in the shadows of your subconscious. The moment you recognize the mechanics of your own cognitive laziness, the moment you understand that your digital environment is a heavily manipulated construct, the cage begins to crack. You possess a System 2, a deliberate, analytical, deeply logical engine capable of overriding your biological defaults. Waking it up requires sustained effort. It requires intentionally seeking out cognitive strain, relentlessly questioning the invisible data, and consciously decoupling your core identity from the daily information you consume. The choice is fundamentally yours. You can continue to outsource your reality to an algorithm optimized for engagement, floating comfortably down a river of endless confirmation bias until you lose the ability to think critically altogether. Or you can choose the harder path. You can choose to endure the friction of diverse perspectives, actively rebuild your intellectual autonomy, and take back control of your own mind. The machines may have built the cage, but you are the only one holding the key. Thank you for watching, and never stop questioning what you see.